Welcome to this week's edition of the Midweek Market Update. I'm Ashley Ross from Victory Fiduciary, and today we're going to talk about Jerome Powell, the Fed, and whether or not we believe that they are the Superman that will be able to continue to prop up this market for eternity. And so, there's been a lot of talk. I've had a lot of conversations with clients and for just, friends. We've been talking about just different things going on with the economy. And it never fails that at some point in the conversation, they'll say, yeah, but the Fed. And so the idea that, the Fed's not going to let anything else happen. The Fed's got our back. The Fed has unlimited resources, and it's not going to let anything happen. And to an extent, I would say the Fed has probably done that. And as a result, we've gotten ourselves into quite a predicament, unfortunately, because what's happened is that there's become such a significant false sense of security in the Fed that we now have exuberant investors that are chasing returns, they're chasing yields, they're getting involved in the market, they're being really careless at times, reckless, and in the back of their mind, all they are saying is, yeah, but the Fed. And so today I really wanted to talk today about steps that the Fed has done to help prop up and keep the market, having somewhat of a substantial recovery, but also understanding the limitations of that and the fact that at some point valuations, fundamentals, and technicals are going to take over here. And so we saw a really swift intervention by the government and the Federal Reserve as the pandemic began to really affect our economy. And so we saw that the Main Street Lending Program was instituted trying to get small and large businesses able to have access to capital that they might need. The Paycheck Protection Program allowing getting money from the government to be able to keep your employees on payroll. We saw that the stimulus program that came to give families and individuals money with the hopes that they would go and spend it and get that back into the economy. The Fed has talked about a pretty substantial quantitative easing program, and with that just simply means that they're going to go and buy treasuries and bonds from financial institutions directly, and by doing that, that's going to free up capital and within the banks to allow them to lend out, so hoping that maybe more people will take loans to be able to pay employees, maybe to be able to just to keep their doors open. And the whole idea of obviously that we lowered interest rates again was to help drive liquidity, to keep money coming back into the markets, into the economy. And so from that standpoint, the Fed really has been a Superman. So liquidity absolutely has been driving the market. And so, we've seen even just as the Federal Reserve makes promises about things, they don't even have to necessarily do it. They just have to say they're going to do it. And the market has responded. And so but there's a problem with all this because now we've gotten ourselves into quite the situation because we have investors chasing performance. We have investors who just believe that no matter what, they can be irrational, they can even be reckless, and the Fed's going to have their back and nothing's going to happen. And so what we know is that while, yes, the Federal Reserve has done a great job at attempting to prop up the market, we do know that this is not the end-all be-all. It's really designed to be a temporary fix to situations. We've seen history time and time again that eventually as quantitative easing and other programs begin to get weaned away, which they need to eventually, then we see that almost immediately there's negative economic impacts on that. Typically also the government needs to be really careful because if you do too much quantitative easing, you can actually destroy the entire credit market. So there absolutely are limitations. But like I said before, what's happened now, we've got a market on a runaway train and it's on the Fed train right now. And so we've really gotten away from our valuations. We've gotten away from the technicals and the fundamentals, which are eventually going to matter. And so this was really designed to try to put a stopgate to the market, not allowing it to kind of fall off the cliff. But so now what we're seeing, though, we're seeing these incredibly overstretched numbers. We're actually seeing Wall Street is defending why they're buying the stocks that they are, saying that they are looking 2 years forward to earnings. They're literally saying, forget 2020, forget 2021. Let's think about what we think 2022 is, and now we can justify paying what we're paying. Well, there's a big problem with that because if we today are pricing in earnings of assumptions from 2 years from now, well, that means you're literally locking in then that same low performance for the next 2 years, unless we're going to continue to artificially inflate what the future returns after that will be. So you see, we've gotten ourselves kind of in a pickle here, because we're going to use these types of rationalizations to try to justify why we're going to be involved in a market that's overpriced, but then there's issues that come. And so this is one of the reasons why Warren Buffett is still sitting on $137 billion of cash, because he recognizes that right now the market is so detached and it's very dysfunctional. And so I think that this is an important chart just to show. So the orange line here, that's the S&P 500, and it's just showing, you know, different fiscal issues that have happened. That blue line there, that's the quantitative easement line. That's the, you know, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. So you can see, as we went into that significant correction there, the Fed's balance sheet increased dramatically. So what we have seen with this rebound and recovery in the market and how much it has taken in terms of intervention, it's been significant. And again, you know, one of the issues when we talk about having these types of programs for too long is that it actually winds up beginning to have negative impacts on the economy, and the Fed knows that. So even you can see that some of the responses of the Fed has been a little more muted, because they're recognizing that the market at this point is so overvalued. We're in the middle almost of a bubble here, and I think that the Fed needs to be mindful now of making sure that it's not adding kind of additional fuel to that, because they recognize that the market's come too far too quickly. And so, you know, the longer that we have some of these programs in place, the less of the desired impact we'll have, because what happens is that eventually with these programs, it winds up beginning to drive inflation up. It causes our, you know, as we continue to print money to buy these bonds and these treasuries, we keep interest rates low, it winds up having negative impacts. People begin to take on more debt sometimes because they can get more favorable loans. The value of the dollar begins to be driven down. And so these are all long-term effects that would be considered negative. And again, what we've done here so far is we just have people chasing performance. And so one of the negative aspects that's happened here is, if you look at the top chart right there first, so if you're familiar with the FANG stock, so that would be like Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft. That green line there is just that index's return. And so that's part of the S&P 500 as well. And so if you look at the red line, that would be the total market return for the S&P. The blue line below that shows the difference that if we took that FANG stock out of there. That's pretty significant when you realize how much that return would differ right now without those stocks, because we are so over-concentrated as a result of investors trying to chase yields. And that is not a healthy market right now, what we're seeing. When you look at the market cap of the S&P 500, having 25% invested in those FANG stocks, the concentration here that we're seeing, and I said this a few weeks ago, haven't seen concentration like this since the 70s. This is not healthy. So this denotes that there's significant underlying weakness to the rest of the index, and we should really be concerned about that. But this is what happens when a market becomes just so overheated without having technicals and fundamentals underneath of it. You know, and so we talk, so yes, the Fed has done a great job, but we need to be really careful, because the very same things that it's been doing to help prop up the market can turn out to be the market's kryptonite if we're not too careful here. And so, you know, I like the example of saying that right now, where we are with the market, we have a rubber band that is literally stretched to its limit. And so, you know, the Fed has helped to kind of add some additional abilities to stretch to this rubber band. But remember, as far as something stretches, it'll snap back the other way just as hard. And so right now we are completely overheated, overvalued. We're detached from fundamentals. We're detached from the technicals. And eventually that rubber band is going to snap. And then when it happens, we're going to see that corrective action of those other areas. And so that's really what my concern is. So when we talk about, yeah, but the Fed, I think we need to keep in mind the fact that what the Fed has instituted, implemented, was never really, it never intended to be the long-term solution, because we want to have a free market. We want to have a market that is healthy and that is based upon supply and demand. And so, you know, right now, what we see is just investors that are being driven, you know, by greed, who are chasing performance. And my concern is that eventually that kryptonite's going to catch up with us. So I thank you for joining us today. I just wanted to spend some time and let you know that yes, the Fed has done a great job. I do believe that the Fed is going to try to support us. Just understand that it really should not be the end-all be-all for us as we make our investment decisions. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.